Some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Last year we had an event around work-life balance. In this year we will have a discussion around circular talks. My name is Malin. I'm one of the organizers of Gothenburg Tech Week. And with that said, over to you.
Thank you, Malin. And I'm Jacob Onstein. I'm the strategy officer here at Techno Creatives. And we are very pleased to have our former advisor, Tomas Haglund, with us here today. He has a good experience of initiating and driving, sustainable strategy and also implementing it. And our idea today is to have a quite interactive session, both with you guys here and also with the one online. So we will run it for, let's say, I think it will be aimed for around 30 minutes. It will be both presentation and continuous dialogue. Feel free to jump in during this continuously, but there will also be a separate Q&A session at the end, especially for the ones that are online. Okay, so let's start. I think we pose, for this session, we posed a question to Thomas. And this was basically how to think systematically about driving a sustainable business and also finding new business opportunities. So the first questions we're going to run here for Thomas is, what is a sustainable business?
I can start by introducing myself, perhaps. My background is I was actually a former colleague of Jacob from Accenture, where I worked 15 years as a strategy consultant. I was responsible for our sustainability practice in the Nordics when I left last year. And now, since a week back, I'm working for a local Gothenburg investment company called Formica Capital. Formica Capital is owned by part of the Stena family, or family behind the Stena. And the idea with Formica Capital is that we should invest with purpose to drive impact. So my role there is as head of innovation, sustainability, and digitalization.
And you mentioned you were also a colleague with me on Accenture, and there you had a Nordic role. Would you elaborate a bit on that? What industry did you work with during that time at Accenture?
So I work primarily with retail, automotive, and industrial equipment, but sort of cross-industry as well, particularly with sustainability, which was more of a functional expertise rather than industrial expertise.
And just one more question around that. When did Accenture start to focus more on sustainability?
So I guess it's a two-folded answer. I don't know if they have yet, but we started in 2005 to build a practice around sustainability, which I think was quite early for being a global management consulting company. And in the Nordics, we had the practice the last 10 years. But it definitely have more room for development that full market in terms of being consultants that can really help companies thrive with a sustainable business rather than just being compliant and being responsible rather. We will come back to that a bit.
Okay, very good. I think that serves as a good introduction. So let's start then by decoupling the questions a bit and stating then, let's start with stating then what is actually a sustainable business.
Yes. Let me see if I can. This was Formica Capital. So I think that one of the key topics, I'm not answering your question here, I know that, but one of the key topics around sustainable business, which I think is also imperative for what is a sustainable business, is that we have this huge challenge with climate change, and to me it's quite imperative that if you're not building a resilient business that can adapt to climate change, you will not exist tomorrow. And that's also kind of where you can start and say, what's a sustainable business? I think that different sustainability topics will have different time frames to mature. I think climate is one of these where we really need to do something, and that we see also society really fast adapting to it, even though we have some backlashes in terms with the Trump administration in the US. There's still quite a heavy progress in society at large, and business that wants to be sustainable, or sustainable businesses, are businesses that can adapt to these topics. We put together a sort of a glossary, and I think that these are important to keep in mind when you're a business thinking about sustainability. That you have sustainability, which is defining how can we meet the needs of tomorrow without compromising, or the needs of the present without compromising the abilities of future generations. So that is sustainability. Well, the mega trend of sustainability, which is sort of something that is happening now, where we have a society which has been built on an unsustainable practice and needs to shift. And this happens across industries, across geographies. That's a mega shift in society which is happening. So that's not really sustainability. It's more like a mega shift run by the fact that society wants to be more sustainable. And then sustainable business is, how can you make business on this shift? How can you both drive impact in terms of helping this shift happen? And how can you be responsible to make sure that you will not be hit by this shift?
And I see you put up there also circular economy, and I think it's good to define then. So what's the difference between a sustainable business and a circular business model, or in this case, a circular economy?
So I think because these are also often mixed up, especially in the Nordics, because we have so much a focus on the environmental side. It's important to say that circular economy, that's not necessarily sustainable. It's more about how resources flow. And we had that as one of the introduction points to this session. But so a circular economy, that could be basically the materials flow over and over again, being recycled or going through the biosphere. Well, we had some examples when we were working with a large global retailer looking at China and steel recycling. This was 10 years ago, so it might be different now than then, but it was clearly not sustainable to recycle steel there. It was better to use virgin steel because it was so dramatic environmental impact from the recycling. It was so dramatic social impact on the people working in that industry. I think that similar to lead battery recycling, where you can have a good lead battery recycling, bringing the lead back into the economy, while it has quite a lot of adverse effect on the people working in that industry, which can have a huge health impact. So circular, that's more resources. Sustainable, that's bigger than that. So you definitely we need to be circular in order to be sustainable, but it doesn't need to be sustainable just because it's circular.
Okay, very nice. So the hierarchy there is, in your mind, then, to prioritize, first of all, understand sustainability and capture a sustainable business before moving into a circular flow. Is that how you would pose it?
I don't know if it's a hierarchy, but it's important to keep those in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the kind of distinct differences between them.
And then again, so what areas do you see are the ones you should focus on the most, both from a mega trend point of view, and then also when you deep dive into different sustainable businesses? What areas can drive this change, let's say?
So I think this is from a Nordic perspective. I think that From a Nordic perspective, I think definitely circular economy, as mentioned, is an area where we have a history of being very good, where there's a lot of improvements needed. So I think that's an important area. We did some studies back at Accenture showing that between 2010 and 2050 we need to quadruple the material efficiency in the economy. So we need to make 4 times as much dollar out of any kilo of material we put in order to be able to sustain just the GDP growth that we're expecting. So that's an important area. I think, as I said before, I think climate change is super important. And I think that sometimes in the debate in Sweden we kind of get lost that there's a lot of momentum happening, because the general media debate here is that it's not happening fast enough, which is true, but that doesn't mean that it's not moving in the right direction. I think, like in the U.S., which is since the Trump administration took over, being very defensive, still you have like 70% of U.S. population believing that America needs to do more. So there's a lot of things happening there. And then I think finally, it's not really a sustainability topic, but I think it goes across. I think that digitization will drive sustainability and accelerate sustainability in terms of making insights much more easier to it's easier to come and act to action on an insight based on the information that you get. You get a lot more information about how the actual worker welfare is in the Bangladeshi factories that make your H&M clothes. You get a lot more insight in where does the actual battery lithium comes from in the Volvo cars, etc. So that trend will accelerate sustainability in general.
And I guess it's also interesting from an industry perspective. I mean, taking a macro perspective, say you want to make an impact here and want to drive, a positive impact. What industry would you say could have the most impact, both from a macro perspective, but maybe also then from a Nordic perspective?
Yeah. So I prepared a bit of slide on that. I think these are large industries now, and but these 5 industries, it is definitely where a lot of things will happen. You have the energy industry, you have mobility, you have material, food, and infrastructure. And I think if you put these together and include our flying into mobility, this stands for 98% of climate. But it also are areas where you have a lot of technology development coming, and a lot of change in habits that is required in order for us to be able to be sustainable. So these 5 industries have huge opportunities, because things will need to be done differently.
From a Nordic and a global perspective?
I think, yes, from a Nordic perspective, definitely. A lot of the as a Nordic companies, you can either be working in these industries, and then definitely in the Nordics, perhaps infrastructure and mobility is more of a necessity than energy, because we have quite a good energy mix already. But if you're a Nordic company and you have global aspirations, then these are industries that are very relevant.
And then tilting that question a bit, stating then, which industry is somewhat overlooked but still have a strong impact? So meaning when we talk with mobility here, for example, everyone knows about mobility. A lot of people knows about the electrification in mobility. Yeah. But how would you say that, okay, where do we need to make more impact and focus even more?
I think, and again, there's 2 answers to that. I think that from just a global perspective, I think the energy sector, it's not overlooked, but it's a lot of things happening there at the moment. I think that as you say, in the mobility sector, there's a lot of things already happening there. And with Tesla's huge stock valuation that we discussed just earlier, it indicates that there's a lot of investors looking at this space. I think that food and the infrastructure are sort of overlooked in terms of that they require just as massive change as going from a fossil fuel car into an electric car. While it's a more distributed the change that is required. There's a lot. It's not just 20 large automotive players or 20 large big oil companies that needs to change. It's a lot of companies, and I think there's an overlooked opportunity there in that sector. And we do see some successful Swedish companies in this space, especially in the food industry, like Oatly and Oomph, that has gotten also international recognitions.
And I guess then tying into this systematic change that we say that, okay, how can you then think systematically about this, leaving maybe the consumer angle of it, and think maybe more of the full value chain? How should you act as a company and think as a company?
We can skip this for later, but I think this is a good way of thinking systematically about it. This is a view that we used quite a lot in Accenture, and also used both from a sustainability perspective, also from digital, and where you can use different sets on the different axles here. You can also look at what we do and what we sell, but the three perspective of how do we operate as a company, what do we do, how can we do things differently, and there you find stuff like energy efficiency, material efficiency, water efficiency, climate emissions, etc. It's a lot of these more operational things where you have 2, 3, 4, 5% increase every year, or improvements every year. On the product perspective or services perspective, there's more of a growth agenda, where you can look at what kind of opportunities are arising now in terms of when legal regulations are changing, when societal perspectives are changing, so arising new markets, and where you can start having a growth agenda, which is always easier to work with than a cost agenda. So, for example, being a truck company, having an electric truck. And those requires quite different things. So I think systematically you can look at them very differently. Yes, it is better if you have a good operations, if you want to be trustworthy selling an electric truck, but it's not a necessity, so you can look at them differently. And then the third perspective is the system perspective, and that's really looking at it from a disruptive perspective, instead of saying, what is it really the functionality that our customers are after? Why are they buying a truck? Is it because they like trucks, or is it because they want to move goods from A to B? And how can we do that differently? How can we engage in that? And there, hopefully, that coincides quite a lot with the digital disruption that is happening in most companies' digital work.
Yeah, because just to make this one even more, let's say, understandable, if you take a company like IKEA,
yes,
how would you put different initiatives from IKEA in this 2x2?
Yeah, so I would say on the operational view from how they do things. So what you can do now at any IKEA store is that you can bring back textile and cardboard, and they recycle that. So that's definitely something that they do differently, which is very operationally focused, and which has an aspect to you as a customer. It's a service to you as a customer, but they also have a cost effect on their business, because they get access to textiles or cardboard much cheaper. On the product perspective, we've seen them both do some choice editing. They've removed batteries, one-time batteries, and they only sell rechargeable batteries. They've started with solar energy, for example. And then thirdly, on the system perspective, they started doing leasing. So especially in their product to or business customer segments, they're starting now over the world, in 20 countries, leasing out office furnitures. They started just when COVID came, so I guess that's kind of take some time for them to ramp up that with the structure.
And that is mainly business to business or for the office?
Yes, and I think that's a key, because you need to find, where are the, because everything, when we switch to a more sustainable business model, it's not of necessity more profitable in the beginning. So you need to find those niches where it really are profitable. And for them to start building, where they have a more, an office, they can have a longer lease period, they can have more predictability of the actual way the buyer is behaving, while consumers behaves more differently. So they can learn a lot within that certain segment, and then they can apply that to other types of products more to the consumer.
And I guess this is one framework to apply. I think a lot of people here knows about the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 being quite broad. What's your opinion on that framework? Leverage that in a business setting.
I think that I think the Sustainable Development Goals is very good. I think that it's more of a political framework than a business framework. I think it's a very good way of showcasing what you're doing, because it is a blueprint for the world, basically. Here you have 190 world leaders that come together and say this is what we strive for, and we've broken that down into 17 areas, 169 sub targets, and I think more than 1,000 sub targets, which is a great way for you to think about what do we need to be more sustainable in as a society. But I think it's quite difficult to use as a way of developing your business, because everything ends up in responsible consumption goal, or everything ends up in the energy targets or zero hunger targets. So it's a good blueprint to understand where are we going, and it's a good way of showcasing what you're doing, but perhaps not the best in order to identify what you should be doing.
Okay, because the next part of our key question was then, I think we put forward some of the frameworks, what is the actual sustainable business, and I can think about it. But then as a company you also need to transform into a sustainable business. So what should be the key steps here to start transforming into a more sustainable business?
Maybe we could just start here and then come back to that, because and this is kind of high level, but I think what we've seen, and that's my experience also. I've seen hundreds of frameworks at Accenture, and this one stayed with me quite a lot. And it's basically 7 capabilities in this. We've framed it into 4 areas, but you need to work systematically with all these 4 capabilities, building that up in your company. And so one is strategy. So you need to really be realistic about where you are today. Where are your strengths, but also where are your weaknesses? How are we negatively affecting the world today? And I think especially big oil has been very they've been bad at this. They haven't really been realistic about where they are and try to hide that, and that means that they're too late on the game. While also in the strategy part, you need to set the growth and differentiation agenda. So you can't set an agenda based on we should be more cost effective or we should be less bad. You need to have an agenda where you can build excitement around the growth agenda, or you can differentiate versus your competitors. I think that one is key from a strategic perspective. Then also innovation, sustainability is an innovation agenda. You need to start with what is the actual customer issues that we are trying to solve, and how can we solve that in a different way. You can't start with backing yourself out of trouble, so to say.
And a concrete example there was the truck case, where you say, okay, the actual case is to move from A to B.
Yeah, so that's one way. Or for example, an electric car. You know, Tesla came to the conclusion that we need to build a charging network in order to be able to provide the same service to the customers as with a fossil fuel car. But if we do all these things integrated, that could be a good business case.
That is Volvo Cars, which has not built out their charging network yet.
No.
And that is a bit worrisome, I guess, from both Volvo Car perspective and Volvo Car owner.
Yeah. I guess they have, I mean, a different perspective on how they will solve that, but they're expecting the utilities industries to solve that, or they want to, you know, tag along on the Germans' charging networks. The third one is value. So you really track and measure progress and value creation. So you need to try to connect sustainability to some sort of value, because otherwise you will never prioritize it. And you can often do that link somehow. So you could either be cost, it could be revenue, it could be intangibles, it could be less risk, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And staying there for a bit, so you have the CO2 emissions. Yeah. I guess you can track. What other key metrics do you see within the value area, which is not money driven?
No, but it depends quite a lot what kind of industry you're in. But you know, you could track energy, you could track materials. So we had a discussion with IKEA was basically, you know, can we track how much revenue we have per kilogram of material that we use? So there's a lot of, but I think it differs quite a lot between industries. So it's difficult to get some sort of generic perspective on that. I think the most important thing is that you kind of break it down into cost, revenue, intangibles, and risk. And I think that risk factor, besides insurance and financial services, I think the risk factor is often overlooked. So, for example, if you're Volvo Cars in 2015, what's the risk of not doing an electric car? You know, was that really appropriately measured versus the risk of doing an electric car and failing on that? And I think that, you know, generally, especially in large companies, I think smaller companies are much better in this, but generally in large companies, they kind of to underestimate the risk of inaction and overestimate the risk of wrong action. And then I think finally what kind of differs sustainability from a lot of other value areas is the need for collaboration. So you need to engage stakeholders. You should collaborate with your competitors. You should collaborate with your consumers, because in the end, we as humans need to fix this problem, and that makes it more relevant to collaborate. And if you try to go about it alone, it will be much more difficult. And I think also there's much better advocacy opportunities here, that if you advocate for something that is good for your business and good for society, people will have much more tendency to listen than if you only advocate for stuff that you want to happen that is good for your business.
But I think this is a good overview of what to focus on. And the follow-up question would be then, what has actually triggered this initiating the transformation? When you see, does it differ by company or by size of company or by industry?
Generally, historically, I think that a big difference has been the perspective of ownership from the owners. So I don't think that it's, at least to my view, I think that IKEA and H&M are perhaps in terms of the journey that they're on, the two companies that have come furthest among the large corporations in Sweden. And that's triggered because they have owners that really do care for the long-term success of the company. So I think that's a trigger point. I mean, we were doing circular economy work with IKEA in 2011, where the terminology circular economy hadn't really been widestream accepted, or even, you know, we didn't even call it that. So I think it was. And they did that because they kind of saw that, you know, we're going to be in here for long term, and we need to have a long term perspective. So I think that one, the ownership role is important. That's why also I signed up for Formica Capital, because we have that long term view. I think then as some companies have got kicked in the butt from some, you know, scandals or stuff. So you could see
We've got some fresh.
You need to be, I think there's a twofold way here. I think that you need to be very driven by emotions. You can really act on that, and then you still need to do the analytics or the analysis very cold-minded. So, you know, having a warm heart and a cold mind, that's the best thing. But I think that if you're in a mid-sized company, you can really really talk about, you know, what actions and how do our actions actually impact the world in general, and what's our morale and ethical in this, and then you can go back with that as a kind of as a right to speak, and you can do quite a good analysis, and then you can take quite a lot of decisions, which a large company can't do, based on the fact that this is good for society, and we do see that it seems to be a good business case. So then it doesn't need to be the best business case you have, perhaps. You just need to know that it is a good business case, and let's go with it. Let's run with it, see what happens. But you know, honestly, I'm still learning a bit of the non-large companies world.
But how has the big ones done? Has they like position a sustainability officer, or has they rather say that no, this is something that should transpire through the whole organization, so we don't need a specific role for it?
Yeah. No, I think that in a large company you definitely need a specific role for it. In a smaller company or a mid-sized company, I'm not so sure. I think that, you know, it's more important that people are driven and that they have some sort of general understanding of what's actually do we deliver to customers, rather than have very deep insights into sustainability. Because that's, you know, a sustainability officer or a sustainability office at a large corporation, they have quite a good understanding of, you know, what's the challenges we have as a society. But I don't think on a mid or smaller size company that's not really necessary to be in that level of depth of understanding what's the next big thing after climate. It's more important to be, you know, how can we provide this service that we provide in a more sustainable way. And then it's more important to try to integrate it. As a business leader, you can challenge your people, you know, come up with ideas. If you're working in you know, mid-level, you can take your own initiatives. I think so.
And I think I would like to second the part where you say that it needs to have a business value, and you need to think analytically about it. And I think we can second that from a digital perspective, stating if we were to initiate new projects, you need to have a value-driven manner, and especially now during these times. But those are quite tricky also to get. I think it's hard to say what tips and tricks do you have to think more business-driven from a function that might be not so business-driven from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know if this helps. These are the four value dimensions. Obviously, everything you do needs to have, you know, what's the attractiveness of what we're doing, and what's the likelihood that we actually can implement what we're doing, and that prioritization is important. But I really do think that, you know, just sitting down with these four things in front of you and just thinking to yourself, if we would do A, B, and C, how would that impact the value, and what would the cost of that be? I don't think it need to be more tricky than that, but that you at least that you start thinking as a CFO or as a CEO that, you know, it comes down to the bottom line somehow, and then if you have a good idea, and then you can give some argument based on where the value comes from, then perhaps at least you can get some time to deepen that business case, or, you know, if depending on what kind of culture you have, you can start implementing and see what happens. And I think also that, you know, if I can just, I think this is important, that it's very difficult to create a sustainable company in 2020 because the fundamentals around in society are not there. So it's more about, you know, how can we start the right initiatives that will make us sustainable tomorrow. So this was a view that we often used with our clients as Accenture. So what does sustainable look like in the future? How does actually sustainable look like? And, you know, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. Yeah, fine, but what can we do? Yes, some of these things are actually feasible to start with. So the workshop method backcasting is something that I think is very good for sustainability as general. You know, how would a sustainable car look like? Okay, and then you trigger that back down. What can we do today, which is feasible in terms of not costing too much, which our customer would appreciate. So, for example, the IKEA case that I mentioned, that you can bring in cardboard and textile, that came from looking at, you know, if we bring back all our materials, you know, how would that look like? And then we came to the conclusion, yeah, you could do that, but, you know, it's not a really good business case today. But we need to build the capabilities of doing that. We need to understand that when a customer comes back with a rug or a cardboard, we need to have the ability to take that in our store, or to, you know, take it back through our delivery vehicles. And by doing that for 5 years, then we might be able to also take a mattress back, which we can't do today because it will cost so much for us. And there's a municipality, system for that. But so.
I think you mentioned IKEA here several times. What would you say, going into the last part of the key question here, driving new business opportunity with a sustainable focus? Is IKEA, I guess, is one of the companies and success cases you have. What other ones do you have on top of your mind that you would like to highlight?
On top of my mind. But I wouldn't say that IKEA is a success case yet, actually. But, you know, if they have 1% of the global cotton use, so it's kind of imperative for them to get this right. I don't think that they've done that yet, but they're definitely on their way of doing that. It's hard to overlook Tesla, which I think started with pretty much this journey. You know, we need the Tesla Model 3 that we can sell in X amount, and then you start with the Tesla Roadster, then the Tesla Model S, which have propelled them through a journey like this. I think the transition that Unilever is on is quite impressive, and that's also spurred quite a lot in the food industry in general. So I think just to mention two of them, then there's obviously quite a lot of these smaller startups, which is happening all over the place. I think the Svea Solar, which was started by a few people from Linköping University, which are installing rooftop solar in Sweden, and has grown to 500 million SEK in revenue in like 5-6 years. A good example that you don't need to be the big multinationals to do this. So.
Okay, and I think with that, well, let's start by making an applaud to Tomas. Thank you very much. And I think our idea now is to open up a bit for Q&A, if you have any questions to Thomas here. And I think I can start with one. Now we're focusing a lot from other companies, but how are you thinking at Formica Capital? And are you driving your both internally and I guess externally with the investment?
So this question was not prepared, but I prepared it. No, but one of the things that we've done is we've done something I would call the Sustainable Solutions Map. So I do understand that you don't see any of the information on this, which is quite intentional. But we started with these 5 industries that we talked about. We also had a 6th one called People Positive. And then we looked at, how does a sustainable energy system look like? How does a sustainable mobility system look like? How does a sustainable infrastructure system look like?
And this was what do you call the workshop? The
backcasting?
Backcasting.
Yeah. And then we but it is using oil or other types of energy, and it needs to be electrified. And then we looked at what kind of things are going on today in these industries that could be interesting for us to invest in. And this, we call it this. It's a living map. It will definitely evolve over time. It's open source in that sense that we want love input to it. We have now, I think, it's around 40 different areas. Which could be future investment opportunities for us. And when we receive a pitch that do you want to invest in this company, we use this as one of the things that we're looking at. But we're also have an impact analysis where we're looking at this is how important is this industry for the sustainability shift. Can this industry without major changes be operated within planetary boundaries? What is the business model of this company? Do they have an edge versus other companies? And then we look at, are they reporting on sustainability? Is the management team showing that they, drive and purpose around this? And also, we're looking at other owners if we need to share on it. What they done in similar situations, etc. So those are kind of the major 2 things. And then we will also go in, and that's one part of my work will be to go in and actually work together with the management teams, get them educated on sustainability, working with these frameworks that we have, make sure that they're actually doing the homework and looking for all the opportunities that you can have. And finally, we give them mandate, quite a lot of mandate, like IKEA and H&M owners have given their management teams quite a lot of mandate to look at this, and expectation also that they should have a progress.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Any additional questions from the audience?
Now we have been talking about mostly mid-sized or large companies. I think we are looking at startups.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to start thinking of this, start having a positive footprint, impact on the business. What are your thoughts and recommendations?
I haven't worked quite a lot with startups. We did some work with H&M with startups, but then you had sustainability as the kind of inherent part of the business model. So with that back in the back of my head, I would say that the most important thing is to get into your culture the importance of sustainability over time. So because when you're a startup, you need to be super focused on getting capital, growing, getting to black numbers, etc. And don't forget about sustainability. I think, for example, a good example of that is Uber, which was a company I touted quite a lot when they came. Look at this, we can use cars and drivers much more efficiently. And they really got lost on sustainability, and they have huge troubles now. Cities are banning Uber. California, this was just a few weeks back, California had them hire all their drivers, so they're definitely taking their business model apart. While Airbnb built it in from the beginning, it was also a digital startup, but it was also an efficiency startup, and they built in sustainability from the beginning, and they have much better. They also have social issues problem, with Barcelona and Paris having, condoms where old people are renting out, so those communities are dying. But Airbnb has a dialogue, and I think that's basically because they built that in from the beginning. And I think that's an opportunity you have as a leader of a startup, that if you show that this is important, you can still keep focus on what you need to do in short term to survive, but you will build some sort of awareness that when you are a larger company where you are more structured, you will have that in place. I'm certain.
And I think Techno is in one sense a big company, but also a small one. What we started to do here is to use some of the frameworks and just start focusing, okay, what projects have we done that impact from a sustainability perspective, the operational view, the product view, and the systemic view.
And I think also actually
that's a start, right? To say, okay, what do we actually do and where can we improve?
Yeah.
And I think on the other angle, we haven't talked so much about the circular advantage or how to think about the full supply chain, and how should we focus down the value chain or upwards, and how to impact the customers. Is it a hardware or software?
But you could actually break down this into two simple questions for a startup. It's basically, what is the impact on society that we're having, and how can we maximize that impact? And what are the negative effects that we're having on society, and how can we be responsible on those things? So if you keep those in mind, I think that that's enough for a start.
And also think about, the one case with the software is now we're moving in a bit into the food sector. And we know, as you mentioned, there's a lot of things to do there. And how could you trigger a different consumer perspective? And there we talk, okay, you can use with the user interface, highlighting the CO2 impact of each product, etc. So I think there's a lot of this that can be done, and that also supports the growth of the company.
Yeah.
Very
All right.
good question. Any additional questions from the audience?
You mentioned the open source and open innovation, like Tesla does, like sharing patents and being a good citizen. How do you think like open source and open innovation will change software and technology, for example? I think for me, any resource optimization is sustainable, right?
Yeah. No, but I think and I think that there's definitely some element about collaboration. Some element about collaboration where you can have R&D collaboration, definitely. And there's also examples of that. I think the large paper companies in Europe are collaborating on some areas. There's collaboration in terms of the electronic manufacturers on how do we bring back electronics. And some of that collaboration has been forced by the government, and some has been voluntary. And usually, if it's voluntarily, it works much better. So,
Okay, I think I have one last question then,
Yes.
for Thomas. But end of the day, I think economy is about prioritizing resources, and here we do it from a sustainable perspective. So the question to Thomas would be, how do you prioritize your own time, let's say, and where you focus in relation to the impact you want to make? And that could be interpreted quite broadly, but what industries are you working with? What are you focusing on to make good sustainable impact?
Yeah, so it kind of happens by chance rather than priority, I think. But from a life perspective, I definitely prioritize my family, my 3 sons, and that could be a challenge. From a business perspective, I have prioritized climate change and circular economy as kind of the 2 most important topics for me. And that's the third part of that is how digital can kind of help that. And I think the third part came from the company I came from Accenture, because you had to do something with digital there. And then circular economy came from the fact that we had the opportunity to work with IKEA quite early on the topic, because before it was established. And climate change came from the fact that I've done a lot of skiing, and I've seen what climate change does to off-piste, especially in Verbier. So I wouldn't say that I did prioritize. It was more by chance. But in the end, it doesn't matter. If you do something, it's better than do nothing, right? So and if you do something that you think you're better at, or that you're more passionate about, I think you will make more important stuff than if you just do something that is prioritized from an analytical perspective.
Okay, very good answer. And thanks once again, Thomas, for having you here.
Thank you.
Fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
We've got some fresh new young